Hi, and welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, John Euler and Ed Sparrius sit down one more time for part 2, all about a new book that's out and a study that encompasses a lot of factors of the LGBT community. 78 individuals, ex-LGBT members, and they use that member word quite a bit, which again kind of comes back to that cult scenario. We're going to break it down. There's a lot to unpack in part 2. If you didn't see part 1, we do recommend you go back and take a quick look. We'll be back with more from John and Ed right after this. ExposingSoji123.com provides all the info you'll need to protect your children and family from this transgender ideology. ExposingSoji123.com has done all the work for you, extensively researched and well written by a concerned father, Pierre Barnes, who's been researching for the past 3 years, providing this invaluable information in this time of great need. With dozens of letters, pre-written to every official you can think of within your province, the documents provided are fill in the blank so you can amend and send. It's that simple. Plus, while you're visiting the ExposingSoji123.com website, you'll also find info on teachers' misconduct cases related to sexual abuse in your local area, and the pornographic books that you've been hearing so much about in your local school libraries. Make your voice heard and count for the children to the highest levels of provincial and so-called federal political leaders, health ministers, school board officials, and more. ExposingSoji123.com, where the facts are real. Welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm Brad Wilder. Today, John and Ed continue the discussion for part 2, the Free to Change study. 78 individuals who are ex-LGBT community members have all left the community. Now, they were asked some very specific questions. They provided some very specific answers with specific details about not only their lifestyle, but their future as well. With that, let's bring in John and Ed. You guys covered a lot in part 1. What's part 2 going to get into, John?
Brad, we're going to look at, again, the implications of when, quote-unquote, anti-conversion therapy laws are passed. We're going to look at what happens, the real-world implications. Australia is living through it, New Zealand, Canada. Brad, you all are living through that. It's coming down into the U.S., and people need to awaken. It's in Scotland, I believe. It's all throughout the Western world, right? This juggernaut is coming through like a tsunami, and it has in its sights, ultimately, the overriding of parental rights. And once these individuals, and I call them those that are the pushers of the trans deception, those that are pushing this, have designs on getting a hold of kids to unduly influence them. And really behind the scenes, and Ed, you have seen this, and this was part of then the study that you put together, that once these kids are influenced, they may at some point in time begin to rethink and want to reconsider. And then those that have unduly influenced them don't like that. And so they found the pushers of this ruse. It's really a delusion if you tell someone they could be born in their own body. But they're easily exploited. They're easily manipulated, groomed, then manipulated, then exploited for cash or for sexual profits, so to speak, meaning preying upon a kid. And so these young people are being harmed, both minors that are going into the trans movement and then when they become adults. And so the concern is, have these kids been unduly influenced? And when and if they begin to reconsider, are they free to change? Are they free to be able to seek out those that could help them sit down and explore? And especially as mandated reporters, we better be free to explore, because if you don't explore the 9 red flag clinical indicators of sexual abuse, then all you've done is you're a predator's best friend. You've just done the don't ask, don't tell. Dean. So, Ed, you really you helped spearhead a study that is one of a kind, because as you were telling us in part one of this, as we were getting ready to close, that if ever there's been a study, and this was a very scientific study, both qualitative and quantitative analysis, and here is the study. Let me see if they glare, right? Free to Change study, a survey of, that's right, how many? Sorry, 78 people that ended up, they were in the alternative lifestyle, and they decided that it wasn't for them. And it's a very extensive study, and I was very privileged to be a part of writing one of the chapters. There's multiple chapters, and you were just sharing with us that this has been under massive scrutiny. And what's beautiful about this, and the reason it was provided, is legislation was being rammed through one of the houses of parliament in Australia, where you are from. And there was a study from La Trobe University. It was the only thing being passed around as far as trying to validate the reality that the legislation, anti-conversion therapy legislation, needs to be considered and passed. And you felt compelled with others to say, wait a second, there's another side to this. So you put together an extensive study, and people around the world now can download this and take it to their own lawmakers, can take it to school board members, that this is a bona fide study showing that there are benefits from allowing people to be free to choose the therapist of their own choosing, and they should be able to be free to change if they so desire. Welcome back.
Thanks very much, John. Happy to be here. Yeah, look, isn't that a human right where you want to be able to seek your own happiness? And if your own happiness happens to mean that you no longer want to be part of the LGBT community, shouldn't you have that right to leave that community? But more than that, actually look for help. Because most people, when they want to change their life, need assistance of some sort, whether that's from family, whether that's from religious leaders, whether that's from counsellors. Most people will go looking for some sort of assistance from somewhere. And in Australia, as in Canada and New Zealand now, that cannot happen. Anyone who helps you faces the courts, and that's just an abuse of human rights that's so egregious. How on earth our politicians ever went along with this and passed these laws is beyond us. We just do not understand how that is a possibility. The crazy thing in Australia is, particularly in the transgender movement, you can change your sexual orientation every 12 months. So today I could say I'm male. Tomorrow I could, in 12 months' time, I could come back and say, well, actual fact, no, I'm female. And I can get psychologists that will help me to transition into becoming a woman. If 12 months later I decide, well, actually, no, I am really a male, I can get no assistance to go back. That change I've made, whether it's drugs, whether it's surgery, whatever it might be, social, I cannot go and ask for help to go back to being a male. Now, where is the sense, where is the freedom, where's my rights as a human being to seek my own happiness in that area when legislation says no one can help me? I find that an absolute crime to humanity to be doing this. And we're doing this to kids who are being dragged in this transgender movement at the moment. And many of them by the age of 25 have discovered, and the studies vary somewhat, but somewhere between 70 to 95% of kids, and the reason I say it's that range is because the study is not totally fixed, but certainly somewhere in that range of kids turn around as young adults and decide, yes, I'm in actual fact the gender I was born. I am actually a male physiologically, I'm a male psychologically, and that's what I want to be. These kids can't get help. They're stuck. And they have a lifetime now of living, either being sterile, being sexually incompetent, having constant infections if they've had surgeries, and they cannot, and obviously the anxiety and the depression, they can't get help for this in Australia, in our states. And how can lawmakers justify doing this to our children? It is just unbelievable. And that's the same in Canada. And apparently in the USA, they're trying to do the same thing there.
Right. They've coined it anti-conversion therapy. So they captured they're masters. Those that are manipulative, those that want to exploit people, are masters at capturing the language. So they were brilliant to come up with a phrase, anti-conversion therapy. So what I say is, like, a therapist wants to convert anyone, number one. But that really took hold. It has a religious feel to it, right? The term has a religious connotation. Well, who would want anybody to be converted like that? And then it's based upon these personal stories that can never be, or I've never seen any or heard any that truly are, that provide proof to these different stories we hear, that a parent was told by a kid or a teen that he was really gay, and the parents didn't want it. So the parents took him off to some so-called professional that's going to hook him up to electrodes and do ice baths and, really subject him to aversive therapy. So that's, we hear all those stories and we're supposed to believe that, yet they can't provide proof of who those so-called therapists were or religious leaders. The question is, where are the lawsuits, number one? Because it is illegal. You mentioned that. That is absolutely true, right? That's violating somebody's rights. And I'm wholeheartedly in favor of, if somebody was subjected to torture, then they need to go and sue or press criminal charges. So where are those suits? We don't hear that. But isn't it interesting that those same people that are pushing this narrative that now has changed laws, which this study helps provide proof that people should be able to be free to change, and they are, and there's beneficial outcomes when they make decisions in their best interest, when they're given that information. But those that are saying that conversion therapy happens and that anybody that's going to, any professional or pastor or possibly parent, but as we talked about, this is aimed at primarily mental health professionals and then also pastors, that if a mental health professional or pastor is working with someone, helping them process their emotions, and there may be trauma, there are indications of sexual abuse, and through that processing, the person decides that they don't want to continue into an alternative lifestyle. They want to come back. They want to go back to a different way of being. That's called conversion therapy. So those pushers of that concept are fine when they hold stories up saying this is what conversion therapy does, but they won't listen to the lived experiences of those that were saying or are saying. And on Reddit, there's a group, and there's a detransition group on Reddit that has 50,000 people that have regrets. Yeah. So we have to say they were unduly influenced. And it is, how can, that's what you were just saying, Ed, how can anyone in good conscience, once they start seeing those numbers, ignore that right now 50,000 young people are saying that they were either fast-tracked, unduly influenced, or weren't given the help to process their own emotions and feelings. And if they had been, maybe they wouldn't have decided to undergo life-altering, life-changing, unnecessary surgeries.
And look, as a parent, and I've had 5 kids, not unusual to have a little kid turn around and say, oh, look, Dad, I really think I'm a girl, or, I want to put a dress on. And as a parent, you set a gender example for them, and you would say, oh, that's all very nice, but we're guys, we don't do that. We wear pants or whatever else, whether it's playing with dolls or whatever, however you want to excuse somebody's having the wrong gender. I mean, a child only at a kindergarten the boy needs to start playing with dolls, and the kindergarten teachers here already have red flags up, or maybe he's transgender, as though playing with dolls makes him the opposite sex. But you set gender examples for them. Boys are naturally more rambunctious. Whereas girls are more affectionate, having sort of raised a number of kids. And it's their different sexes is very obvious. You might have girls that are a little bit more masculine, boys that are a little bit more feminine. That's just a normal mix in society. But the thing that I found interesting in the study as it came in, and it's the same for both groups, whether we're talking sexual orientation or gender identity, there seems to be a standard where you've got a very sensitive child who has very bad gender modeling, whether there's an emotionally or actually absent same-sex parent often, or an over-emotional opposite-sex parent. These kids then have trouble relating to their own sex. No, I hate using the word to their own gender because it's been so abused. But you might have a boy who doesn't really get along with other boys, so he spends more time with girls. And then down the track, this child, and that's often because they haven't had that gender modeling. They really don't know how to relate to their own sex and the other sex because they haven't got mum and dad showing them that. And then down the track, invariably, because of their behaviour, they become targets for predators who then sexually abuse these kids. And then you get to the next stage where the predators will introduce them to pornography. And these kids are on this track that they just can't get off. Interestingly enough, society is trying to tell us, and has been now for quite some years, probably since the 80s, your sexual orientation and gender identity is a genetic thing. A couple of years ago, there was a very big study of almost 500,000 people. So we're not talking a small number, to prove and find the gay gene. In the end, what they concluded was that nurture, a person's environment, is what hugely affects to their sexual orientation and gender identity. And their conclusion about nature or genetics was there are indications that this could be caused. In other words, we have absolutely no proof, but we don't want to admit that our study failed to find what we were looking for. And so where people are trying to say, well, this is innate, there is absolutely no evidence for that at all. So when you have groups of people who have been in the gay lifestyle or in the transgender lifestyle, and they turn around and they change their lives, they are proving this is not something that's genetic. And you'll often hear them saying, hear people in the gay community saying, I knew this from a child. Well, what child knows they're sexually attracted to someone else? They may enjoy the company of people of the same sex. It doesn't mean they're sexually attracted to them. This is something that comes down the track. Again, often when these kids get sexually abused, that's when all the lights get turned on and they suddenly start wondering where they actually stand. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. You're the one who's been counselling these people.
And you're exactly correct. And what we find time and time again is there's trauma. There's trauma in the background. And so if you cannot allow for these young people, so we'll kind of focus now on the trans movement for a moment, because really that's what this kind of legislation is really targeted at, right? It's not so much people that are adults that are deciding to change their mind. They really want to prevent middle to late teens from being able to sit down and figure out, where did this come from? Where did this confusion come from? Where do these ideations come from? So if you tell therapists that if a child who now is in a alternative lifestyle, a minor, so that's very interesting. The question is, how did the minor get into that? Usually unduly influenced and groomed through pornography. So there's probably somebody older in their life that's been taking advantage. Right? You can sexually exploit someone without the victim knowing they're being sexually exploited. Think about all cults, right? Cult members are being used by the cult leader for the cult leader's benefit. But the cult members will never describe themselves as being used. So you can play a mind game on somebody. And that's what's happening with these kids. And that's why the pushers of this don't want kids to be able to sit down, minors to be able to sit down with therapists that are going to be able to explore. So number one, that means they're never going to sit down with a therapist that, as a mandated reporter, is going to be able to spot and meaningfully interpret the red flag indicators of sexual abuse. And as therapists are being trained now anyways, that all these indicators reflect that this kid is trans. When in fact, very few abuse victims, especially minors, are ever going to come out and disclose immediately that they're being perped on. They're going to first exhibit symptoms, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, compulsive behaviors, self-injurious behaviors. That's what is going to bring them into counseling initially. The question is, where is that coming from? So if you tell a therapist that any any of that may lead a child, a minor, to no longer want to go into the trans lifestyle, you can lose your license, you can be fined, you can be jailed. And that's where this study, now trying to educate lawmakers, comes in, and so invaluable. So people now have access to a bona fide, rigorous study that they can download. They can go to the site, again, freetochange.org. Ed, and the site is there. And Ed, you referenced that on the site as well, especially CAUSE, Coalition Against Unsafe Sexual Education. Diana Kenny has a number of videos permitted that. We ourselves on Unmasking the Trans Movement interviewed her about how this is the world's greatest scam. And I had first become aware of Dr. Kenny from an interview she did, and I thought I would play it for us because she is being asked to address this issue of affirmation therapy, that we're going to just affirm. That simply means this: if a troubled child comes down, it comes to your office, comes in to seek help and says, "I'm beginning to wonder, right? I don't feel like I'm born. I feel like I'm born in the wrong body." All the things that we know that these trans kids are being told and affirmed. So unless you say yes to them and give them a referral off to the gender clinic, which is now going to medicalize and sterilize and amputate body parts, then you're being accused of conversion therapy. And what we will hear from Diana Kenny in this, and we will also see detransitioners' responses, which is really comes down to this: why wouldn't you want a young person to be able to adequately explore to see if this is the right decision for them? So let's play. This comes from a video that I had put together, really the first one regarding the trans issue, called Understanding the Trans Movement. And we are going to hear from Diana Kenny on the program, The Bolt Report.
The Australian Psychological Association, that represents psychologists, it has now written to the Tasmanian Law Reform Institute saying, and get this, doctors should be able to perform irreversible surgery on children under 18 to change their gender, even when the child's parents say no. Now, the association says that as long as a doctor thinks that a child can make that decision for themselves, they can get that surgery. And what's more, that association says, well, don't worry about giving the child mandatory counselling before the surgery. Scrap it. It's just an unnecessary burden.
What's happening is I took testosterone on and off because I was so dysfunctional. But I took testosterone for a few years, and I had 2 botched surgeries on my chest. And immediately after the second one, the denial that I had been in for the last few years just fell apart, and I was faced with the fact that I was living a lie and that I just couldn't do it anymore. But at that point, nobody was talking about detransition, and I was alone with this problem, and I just started using drugs and ran away from everyone that I knew.
Well, Professor Diana Kenny is a developmental psychologist, and she deals with many parents whose children have declared themselves transgender, born in the wrong body, so it's said. Professor Kenny joins me now. Great to see you. Thank you so much for your time. Can you tell me, Professor, what you make of this recommendation that doctors should be able to perform this gender-changing surgery even without the parents' permission?
Well, obviously I'm dismayed and disappointed that the peak body for Australian psychologists could make such an ill-considered statement that would result in quite young children, often very immature, often with psychological disturbance, making such decisions for themselves without proper oversight. It's very disturbing.
I don't know if it was actual dysphoria. Some of it, maybe it was. I still kind of feel it sometimes, but a lot of what drove me to transition in the first place was linked to a lot of mental health issues and a lot of stuff that I had going on that really should have been taken care of beforehand, but it was not for a variety of reasons.
can we ever really say, as the association seems to suggest, that a child under 16 is capable of making a decision like this, can be mature enough?
I was younger, especially when I was a teenager, 16, 17 years old, I struggled a lot with depression. And I won't lie, at certain points in my life, and I'm not going to go into detail, but at certain points of my life, I was suicidal. Because circumstances, like I said, I won't get into it, but certain points got really rough, and I hit some major lows, and sometimes it got really, really hard to see around the corners and picture the next day,
Look, 16-year-olds vary vastly with respect to their maturity and their intelligence and their capacity to analyse very complex situations. But what we do know about this subpopulation of young people with gender dysphoria is that many of them, actually almost a majority of them, have other mental health issues.
I soon ended up going to a children's mental hospital in my state because I was so depressed that I wasn't going to school and my parents didn't know what to do. So they sent me to the mental hospital for about 10 days and that didn't help. I think I was at the point where it actually kind of made it worse. And I started, pretty soon after that, when I came back, I was still cutting myself and still depressed. It didn't do anything. I still wasn't going to school.
And many come, with a background of serious psychological issues, such as being on the autism spectrum disorder.
There are so many overlapping or interlacing conditions that can be confused for gender, like for a need to transition, or can cause dysphoria, and going through the massive list that nobody ever really went over with me as a kid.
Suffering quite severe depression, anxiety, social isolation, marginalisation, and so on. And they're struggling very hard to deal with these underlying issues.
Something I did as a reaction to what was going on around me, with my toxic relationship. I hate using that word, but that's really what it was. And like my really difficult home life and my struggles with school and my struggles with severe anxiety and depression and, autism, blah, blah, blah. The list goes fucking on and on. And it was just like the only way that I could express what was going on inside of me.
And then to be given the freedom to make decisions about irreversible, life-changing surgery that could seriously impact the quality of their life from that point onwards.
Now, most insurances that cover top surgery require some kind of official letter from one or multiple therapists or like gender therapists or doctors or medical professionals stating that you are a person that experiences gender dysphoria to the extent that surgery is necessary. I got really lucky, and the therapist that I found only required one therapy session in order for her to be comfortable writing this letter for me.
Diagnosed when you were younger, like by an actual clinician, or how did you come to accept that you were transgender in your mind?
Well, as a child, I never got diagnosed by any clinic, and not until I went out on my own at age 18, 19 when I did it on my own. The clinic that I had gone to around 18, 19, well, 18 is when I started to go. The therapist that I got, she actually told me that she could get me all the paperwork that I needed to transition that after my first session with her.
So are you suggesting that they've got other things going on in their lives? They think their problem is that they're born in the wrong body, so to speak, and surgery will fix it, when in fact they've got these other things that surgery will not touch?
Absolutely.
Oh, I felt all my life like I had this terrible, painful gender dysphoria that basically just debilitated me, and I wasn't able to function because the depression was so bad. It's just that, I spent a lot of years, because of trauma, super dissociative.
my dissociations were different. It wasn't like I became these other people, but I do have these other people in my head. Actually, part of what led me to transition is a bunch of these personalities are male. These facets of my personality are male or male presenting. And that sort of made me feel like, well, I'm everything, you know, like I'm not just a woman, I'm a man too. Almost like this non-binary type thing.
And to say that these young people can make the decision for themselves and declaring counselling or psychotherapy or even consultation or discussions with parents irrelevant or an unnecessary burden just defies belief.
You can see the correlation, right? I got really depressed as my dysphoria got worse. You know, I started testosterone and my self-harm got worse. Like, all of these steps I was taking towards transitioning were actually, I felt like they were making me better. Like, in the short term, these little things would make me euphoric. But in the long term, it was just getting worse.
Well, the Australian Psychological Society fails to discriminate subgroups of children and adolescents with gender dysphoria. And what we're mainly dealing with at the moment is a relatively new presentation called rapid onset gender dysphoria. And it's had an incredible increase in the last 5 to 10 years, and in particular young female adolescents who had never shown any sign of gender dysphoria in early childhood, suddenly declaring themselves transgender.
Experienced, and I still do experience dysphoria. All that's really changed is how I choose to label it. And a lot of my trans identity was connected with hating myself and seeing transition as this escape, this way out of my past and this way out of my body and this way out of just everything that I couldn't deal with on a day-to-day basis.
The fact that the Australian Psychological Society submission and other statements that they've made recently fail to acknowledge this new subgroup of gender dysphoria serves to really muddy the waters about what are the underlying psychological issues affecting this subgroup of young people.
The fact that I was so obsessed with hormones, like I couldn't talk about anything else. This should have been some sort of red flag to someone somewhere. Like, I literally, the only thing I thought about was getting on hormones and like transitioning. That was it. Like, that was it. Like, you couldn't have a conversation with me about something else. I don't want to be like that anymore. Like, there's definitely a problem with like the way my brain like looks at things, but it's called my personality. So like, that's it. Like, there's nothing else. I don't know. Like, how did that not raise questions for people? Like my parents, like, this is a problem, not something that should be like given into. But I've kind of always gotten what I want. So like,
and in fact, the children that I've been treating, and the adolescents in particular, I view this rapid onset gender dysphoria as a problem of core identity.
And I would say that my whole life, probably just because I'm quite a sensitive person and because I'm a girl and we're taught to fixate on how we look, I would have a predisposition to getting body dysmorphia.
It's not a problem of gender identity. It's an issue where the young person is struggling to find their core identity. It is a psychological issue and not an issue that can be repaired or corrected with cross-sex hormones and mutilating surgery.
Nobody in the medical or psychological field ever tried to dissuade me to offer other options, to really do anything to stop me besides tell me I should wait until I was 18. This is what Serrano was talking about when they discussed the medical system and how it shouldn't be gate-kept. I want to ask you, how many other medical conditions are there where you can walk into the doctor's office, tell them you have a certain condition which has no objective test, which can be caused by trauma or mental health issues or societal factors, and just receive life-altering medications on your say-so? Does that sound like gatekeeping?
Jump to the conclusion that these young people are transgender and that mutilating surgery that's irreversible is going to resolve all of the issues that are current in that young person's life.
I wanted to find ways of dealing with my gender issues that aren't medically transitioning, and those ways weren't presented to me. The only solution that was presented was chopping your breasts off, injecting yourself with hormones, and becoming a man.
And isn't that exactly then, Ed, what we're talking about? The concerns that you're going to take these kind of kids and you're going to fast track them, not require them to sit down with a therapist or not even encourage it, try to bypass that, or if they do sit down with a therapist, tell the therapist that you're going to lose your license or end up in jail or sued, spending a lot of money, or even a pastor. If these kids rethink this, it goes on. There's a lot of different detransitioners that I interspersed in that video, again, called Understanding the Trans Movement, where these detransitioners basically said, why didn't anybody ask? If I'd had somebody just ask some questions, such as, what do you think this is about? And the one thing that is without exception of all the detransitioners, and again, we just saw 3 or 4 of them, but I've looked at hundreds of these videos produced by these detransitioners, and without exception, I haven't seen one that has not referenced sexual abuse.
Yeah, pretty standard. Yeah. It's interesting to see that England has pulled back from going ahead with conversion therapy. And of course, the Tavistock clinic has been shut down. But then we also have Sweden and we have Belgium, who are really leading all this sort of stuff, have also pulled back dramatically. And then you have countries like Australia and America and Canada going in the other direction. And you've got to say, what's going on? You know, if you look at the testimonies that we have in the study, and you also look at on the site, on the website, we also have a pile of testimonies, a bit over 30. It's quite interesting to read those people's stories as to where or how they got into the position of being into those lifestyles. And many of them say why they weren't happy and why they wanted to be out. And it just shows that people do leave the lifestyle and should have that right. Why should these kids that you just showed there be stuck and not be able to get help to sort their lives out?
And that's what every one of them. That's what every one of them is saying. Ed, let's talk about the aftermath of this. Now, in retrospect, there is information on your site. Remind people where they can access this information.
Yeah, that's free2change.org is where the study is, and our stopsafeschools.com has Diana Kenny, as you just saw, and a number of other professionals. There's articles and videos on there about the whole gender dysphoria area. And I think what you said before, John, is very true. What all this is about the transgender movement. They're using the ex-LGBT people, they're using the LGBT community and supposed conversion therapy abuses as an excuse to push this legislation through to enforce the transgender movement. And that's very much what all this is about at the moment.
So let's talk about this retrospective look then. Tell the viewers, when they access this, what information is contained in this resource.
Okay, so what you're looking at there is a presentation.
We'll make this one available.
You may or may not be aware that your current state government is aiming to ban all practices that come under the name conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a newly created term that encapsulates so many practices, from harmful practices that we do not condone and are simply not practiced anymore, but also helpful forms of assistance that we will discuss shortly. Now, we do acknowledge that there are people who identify as LGBT and are content with this, but there are also people who have same-sex attraction or gender confusion and wish to not live with these feelings. And so under conversion therapy legislation, any form of help for these people that does not align with the LGBT ideology will be made illegal and unavailable. If governments continue to legislate such restrictions that deny people like me and many others the help that we pursued, then it fails to bring a balanced perspective to this parliamentary debate. In 2020, we set up a project to share this other side of the story that many continue to ignore. This book details the findings of this project and was produced by academics and experts in this field. I present to you the Free to Change study, research and reality of 78 former LGBT people. The Free to Change website was the platform we used to facilitate this project. People who had experienced unwanted same-sex attraction and people who had detransitioned came to our website to tell us about their lives. A survey was required of all participants, which gave us the data that we're about to present. In addition, some participants shared their stories via video.
So that just basically talks about conversion therapy in Australia, what the laws are, how they impact people, what conversion therapy is considered to be or not to be, who can help who with what. In other words, if you want to be gay, then you can get assistance. If you decide you don't want to be, well, then there's no assistance, and any assistance that might be given is then the people are charged and brought before the courts. And so, as you pointed out before, very much psychologists, psychiatrists, religious leaders, and parents as well get picked up in this legislation. Absolutely. And look, it comes down to some people putting their hand up and being prepared to be dragged before the courts and to fight this. That's the only way we're going to win this, because if we keep putting our heads in the sand and pretending it's going to go away, it's not. And it's the only way is to ultimately is to fight in the courts. But that means the rest of the community needs to support parents who do this sort of thing.
Right, and that's
and professionals. Sorry.
And that's why I'm appreciative. Again, freetochange.org. Here's right there. Sorry. A very four-color booklet, and it is based on the research. And this is the resource that people can give their lawmakers, their school board members, anybody that needs proof that people can change. They need to be able to be free to change and need to be able to sit down with the people of their own choosing, the therapists or the pastors, to process what likely is trauma-based so that they can make a decision, an informed decision in their best interest, so that we don't continue to have these young people that have regret, and they're called detransitioners. Right now, 50,000 of them on that Reddit site, and that we're not helping kids. And this is not just a minor thing. We're talking about medicalization, sterilization, and amputation of body parts. That's a fairly radical thing to do to troubled kids. Brad, it's just, this whole thing is just unbelievable. Ed, thank you for being just a tremendous resource for us and for spearheading that study.
And thank you guys for your time and for all the work you do, John, for contributing to the study. It was greatly appreciated, and Brad, for what you do in putting this into the air.
Thank you very much to both of you for being here today. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement. Remember, you can find us on BitChute. We're also on YouTube, and you can find us at our website, our home, at unmaskingthetransmovement.com. On behalf of John Euler and Ed Sparrius, I'm Brad Wilder, saying thank you very much for joining us today. Remember, it's not our kids' fight, it's our fight, and it's time to make it count. I'll see you soon.